Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Anton, the Oscars were last night.
They were. Did you tune in?
No.
Me neither. But not a lot of surprises.
Oppenheimer, the big winner, as it was predicted.
Emma Stone with a second Academy Award for Best Actress.
Was that her second one?
Yep. First time was for La La Land.
Wow, never would have thought she'd be a double Oscar winner, although I like Emma Stone.
Yeah, same. I think she seemed very excited. Definitely another memorable Best Oscar or Best Actress Oscar speech, but I don't know if anyone's going to top Sally Fields.
Should I know that one?
It's the, you like me, you really like me.
Oh. Yeah, good for Sally Field.
Yeah.
I'm happy for Christopher Nolan. He's done so many great films over the years. He's finally been rewarded for all his work, and I am especially happy for Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see the RDJ get his due for an awesome performance. He killed it.
Yeah, incredible performance. He's had a really impressive career. Can you name the two previous nominations he received?
Chaplin and what was the other one? Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, that's right. Surprised he didn't get a nomination for Sherlock Holmes.
I could see why it was
or
still
Zodiac.
Like, okay, that one I don't get why not. Like I don't get why he didn't get nominated for Zodiac.
I don't get why Zodiac didn't get a nomination for anything.
So underrated.
Very much so. Yeah. Well, we're going to be covering Zodiac later this year. People might be wondering why we're covering that when it's such a highly regarded film, but that movie made no money.
Made no money. I would say that even us calling it underrated feels like a bit of an understatement.
I don't think it is underrated because it got just tremendously great reviews.
But it didn't get the box office return, and I feel like it's kind of fallen out of conversation a bit.
I think so, maybe. I mean, Fincher's done so many great films that you just don't know. But well, we'll get there. Right. I'm really looking forward to talking about that film because, spoiler alert, we're gonna have nothing but great things to say about it.
Yep, totally agree. But we'll get there when we get there. Before that,
this is why wasn't it better?
And we're diving into ancient China.
Yes, how ancient is up for debate. Although it is during the Qing dynasty, and we'll get to. Well, actually, so I have a bit of trivia for you. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of speculation about when the first film takes place, right?
Right.
We know it's during the Qing Empire, which lasted from the early 1600s until about 1911, right?
Right.
Some eagle-eyed viewer on the internet spotted a date on one of the posters in the first film that places it in 1776.
Oh.
I don't know if that was the intention of the filmmaker or not, but I always thought that was cool.
That is really cool.
Because, when you're watching the first film, you're like, when is this? There's obviously magical superpower stuff in it that obviously was never real, but...
Yeah, and the Qing dynasty is pretty big window.
Right. 300 years or so. A lot can happen during that time. Yeah. This is Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Tarms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And the film that we are discussing today is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny, a film that apparently most people don't even know exists.
Well, we know it exists. And
we do.
We're here today,
Yeah.
ready to talk about it.
You know, you are one of the few people who I mentioned this film to, and you actually knew what I was talking about. It is really funny. Just out of pure curiosity, because this film has such a low profile, I essentially polled a number of our guests and
Mhm.
listeners whether or not they had heard this film. I think I probably asked around 20 people. I would say 15 or 16 of them had no idea that there was a sequel to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Right, which doesn't shock me.
Well, it shocks me, but it also doesn't shock me, which we're going to get into. A real quick admin, just because we always like to do this. As usual, if you are a listener of this podcast and you like what you hear and you haven't made it official, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button. Every little bit counts. We appreciate it. And with that being said,
Yu Shulien must come out of retirement to keep the Green Destiny sword away from the villainous Hades Dai. She assembles a band of fighters to protect the legendary sword from the warlord hellbent on world domination. Released on February 26, 2016 by Netflix, China Film Group, Pegasus Taliant Entertainment, The Weinstein Company, and Ukaipa Films. Directed by Yuan Wu Ping, screenplay by John Fusco, based on the novel Iron Knight Silver Vase by Wang Dulu, starring Michelle Yeoh, Danny Yen, Harry Shum Jr., Natasha Liu Bordizzo, Jason Scott Lee, and Eugenia Yuan. At a budget of $60 million, so that's $85 million adjusted for inflation, and a box office of $38 million, so $48 million adjusted for inflation. Which, quickly throwing it out there, just want to say this did get major release through streaming.
correct. And just for the record, despite the fact that Anton called Donnie Yen Danny, he does indeed know who Donnie Yen is.
Oh, sorry, it just must have been my pronunciation. Sorry about that.
I don't want to get an email from a listener like, how do you not know who Donnie Yen is? We know.
Yeah, believe me, I know Mr. Donnie Yen.
Legend.
So, Pat, we're here today. We're talking about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Sword of Destiny. Why was this movie chosen?
I want to start with a hypothetical scenario for you, Anton. Imagine if around 2009, a filmmaker released a sequel to Pulp Fiction starring Sam Jackson, but nobody else from the original. Imagine if it had gone straight to Netflix or straight to DVD and there hadn't been any hype or any publicity or any fanfare whatsoever, and it was instantly forgotten. That's what happened with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny.
Yeah, sounds about right.
How the hell is this movie not a bigger deal? Why has no one heard of it? How did this come out and go without anything in the way of fanfare? I doubt average audiences even know that this sequel exists.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
These are some questions that we're going to try and answer on today's episode. I am pretty fascinated by this film. And without burying the lead, I don't think this is a very good film at all.
Hmm.
But I am fascinated by the idea of it because this is a sequel to a film that is generally considered a masterpiece and one of the best movies of the 21st century. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out in 2000, and it was unlike anything Hollywood had seen.
Yeah. Those familiar with wuxia films would have seen stuff like Crouching Tiger before the 2000 film. But to your point, Hollywood itself and the majority of Western audiences, American audiences, they had not seen anything like that. I certainly hadn't. I was blown away by that film when I saw it in 2000. And then we get to the sequel 16 years later. It gets pretty much a Netflix only release. That doesn't help. This was really before Netflix had the studio respect that it does now. So this film just kind of came and went. It has a 20% Rotten Tomatoes score, which never helps a film.
Nope, it does not.
And again, we mention this, I feel like every episode. We understand that Rotten Tomatoes doesn't mean everything. It's a weighted average, yada, yada, yada. But 20% is like bad. That's disaster level bad. You will struggle to find any positive reviews of this film. There are some, but with a 20% rating, it's not many.
It's not many, but to be fair, there are going to be some things that we dig into that really didn't help this film get a good chance.
It's not the bad reviews that intrigue me about this film. It's not the quality of this film that intrigues. It's the total lack of hype. I don't remember any publicity. I don't remember any advertising used to promote this film. Now, Ang Lee didn't direct this. That's probably the most important thing to note about this movie. But it still should have been a bigger deal than it was. We had Yuan Wu Ping. He directed the fight choreography of the original film. That should have been a big marketing tactic, right? He's a pretty big name. We had Michelle Yeoh back. We had Donnie Yen. He's one of the, I don't know, would you say one of the 5 biggest martial arts movie actors in the world?
Definitely on the Mount Rushmore.
Right. He's a legend. So this, on paper, if I'm presenting this all to you, right? Okay, we don't have Ang Lee back, but we have Yuen Wu Ping directing. We have Michelle Yeoh. We have Donnie Yen. This should have been a movie with a lot of hype, and the hype just wasn't there, and that's what fascinates me about this. That's why I chose it, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. This is, to me, one of the biggest what-if movies that we are ever going to cover on this podcast.
No, I mean, I totally agree. This genre is one that's near and dear to my heart. Growing up, I loved martial arts films and loved anything to do with martial arts, and of course that includes Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So same thing with Pat. It was just so surprising to see this show up on my Netflix home screen just very casually. And so being able to revisit it after seeing it, a few years ago, it does not quite hold up compared to the original, but we're going to dig in because a bit of the behind the scenes show that it had its own journey that really, again, did not help the film succeed. And it's a bit of a shame because there are a few highlights, but again, really do love me some martial arts films, and I feel like there's a lot of merit when it comes to the how we say to the expectations that were Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny. A lot of expectations were high, at least on paper.
On paper, yeah. And something I do want to add, because this film completely caught me off guard, like you, I had no expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I log on to Netflix. I see this pop up as like one of the lead banner ads, and I'm just dumbfounded. I'm like, what is this? Another Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? Having never heard of it, I pull out my phone, I Google it, and I'm just immediately convinced it's going to be bad, right? I'm like, well, okay, well, there's no way this is going to be good. I don't think it's as bad as the Rotten Tomatoes score suggests. But to your point, talk about big shoes to fill. There was no chance of this being as good as the first one. The first one was lightning in a bottle, and the chance of the sequel recapturing even a fraction of that was very unlikely.
Right. There's even if it wasn't Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, too often do we have examples where sequels are able to capture the greatness of the first. It's very rare. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why I gave the Pulp Fiction example in the intro is this is not just a sequel to a successful movie. We're talking about not only a big box office hit, but a very important, just beloved film that, it got 10 Academy Award nominations. A lot of people would argue it should have won Best Picture that year.
Yeah, I totally agree.
You think it should have won over Gladiator?
I mean, I agree it should have won Best Picture. But man, you got me there. Didn't know it went up against Gladiator.
Yeah,
That
is a heck of a choice you'd have to make if you were voting.
Yeah.
But let's get into this. Let's do the production history. So both the original film and the sequel are based on a series of novels by Wang Dulu. He is a legendary Chinese martial arts fiction author, and would you say in some ways he sort of invented the wuxia genre? He died a long time ago.
Right.
I think the novels were published in the 30s and 40s.
Yes, that's very fair to say.
We already talked about the first film. If any of the listeners are not familiar with the first film, I don't know what to tell you. Just go out and see it. It's amazing. By January 2013, it was reported that a sequel to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon would begin shooting in May, with the now canceled Harvey Weinstein producing. In 2013, Harvey Weinstein was still one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood. The film was co-produced by the Weinstein Company, as well as Pegasus Media and the China Film Group Corporation. Now, initial reports mentioned Ang Lee would be involved, but those were quickly corrected. The famed filmmaker would not be directing this. The screenplay was written by John Fusco, and it was based on the 5th and final book of the Crane Iron series called Iron Knight, Silver Vase. Sun Jianjun, president of Pegasus, says that the script was revised around 10 times over nearly 7 years. Now, lots of big names were attached to this, right? The Weinsteins. Peter Berg is listed as one of the producers. Production designer Grant Major, costume designer Nigella Dixon, both of whom are Academy Award winners. They both worked on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Cinematographer Newton Thomas Sigel is a very accomplished DP. He shot most of Bryan Singer's films. Oh, look, someone else who got canceled. Not Newton Thomas Sigel. I'm talking about Bryan Singer.
Right.
In March of 2013, Donnie Yen confirmed that he had been offered a role in the film, and at the same time, rumors began circulating on whether Michelle Yeoh had been asked to reprise her role of Yu Shulian. By May of that year, the sequel was officially announced, and it was initially titled Iron Knight Silver Vase, the same title as the source material, but then the film was retitled Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Green Legend. Donnie Yen was confirmed to be Silent Wolf, while Michelle Yeoh was confirmed to be reprising her role. Zhang Ziyi declined to return as Jen Yu, saying that she would only participate in the project if it were directed by Ang Lee. So instead, Shuya Chang was cast, while the character appears to have been renamed Han Mei, who is very similar in background as the rogue swordswoman of Wudan to the Jen Yu character. Michelle Yeoh is the only main actor from the first film to reprise her role. Woon Young Park also reprises his Thunder Fist character, but I have to admit, I did not
Mhm.
remember him from the
No.
original film.
Also, it's a shame. I love Zhang Ziyi's character in the original.
It's an incredible performance. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that was her first film.
I believe so, but I
Yeah.
can't. I can double confirm. But
And
yes,
if that
it
is
sounds
true,
right.
that is an all-time great debut performance.
And also just the chemistry of both her scenes with Michelle Yeoh, like
Amazing.
pretty amazing.
I don't have enough great things to say about the original film. It really is one of my favorite films ever.
Mhm.
Back to this film, Natasha Liu Bordizzo's film debut is Snow Vase. Now, Yen Wu Ping, who served as the fight choreographer on the original film, like we mentioned, he directed this, and filming began in August 2014 in New Zealand.
And the film was shot in English and dubbed to Mandarin, unlike its predecessor, which was the other way around, and this generated a lot of controversy from Chinese viewers. The film's subtitle was renamed to Sword of Destiny shortly before completion. The original plan was to release this simultaneously in theaters and on Netflix on August 28, 2015. However, there was a disagreement between the production companies and the exhibitors, the theaters, who opposed this. Regal, AMC, Carmike Cinema, Cinemark Theaters, and Cineworld announced they would not show the film. A spokesman for Regal Cinemas announced that the theater chain, quote, declined to be part of an experiment where you can see the same product on screens varying from the 3 stories tall to 3 inches wide on a smartphone, end quote, as opposed to a regular theater experience. The film was scheduled to be released in China on February 8, 2016, but was pushed back to February 19. The film was released worldwide outside China on Netflix and in 10 to 15 IMAX screens in the United States on February 26, 2016. IMAX CEO Richard Gelfond argued on the rejection by some chains saying, quote, this is a test, and I can't tell you for sure that it's going to work, but I can tell you for sure that attempting to innovate is a good idea because as technology changes, viewers change, and we have to figure out what does or doesn't work, end quote. So a bit of the production history, and that brings us to our first reason of why wasn't it better. So Pat, what is our first reason today?
Poor marketing. We teased this in the intro and we were sort of making a joke about it, but it really is true. Half the problem with this film is that hardly anyone even knows it exists. And I was not joking about reaching out to people to get their thoughts on this, and most of them did not know it was a thing. Most people I asked about this film expressed surprise that there was a sequel to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Same thing on my end. I felt like revisiting and asking people if they'd seen it. One, they did not. And two, it's just, it goes in that bucket list, or it goes in that list of films where you have a huge predecessor and then a lot of people don't even know that there was a sequel made.
I was trying to think of any comparable films to this, and can you think of any off the top of your head? Because I can't. Most people will at least know about failed sequels, but that's just the thing with this. Just people don't even know this was even made.
Right. I mean, we talked about this before the recording. A lot of people probably don't know The Birds had a sequel. One of the
Right.
most beloved Alfred Hitchcock films had a very bad sequel.
But anything present day, I can't really think of any.
Anything of this caliber, really hard to think of.
It would almost be like if they made a sequel to Gladiator, but they are.
Whoa, whoa. But wait, they are.
They are somehow, and still haven't quite figured out how they're going to do it, but at least people know about that. People know Gladiator 2 is coming. Nobody knew this was coming. Nobody knew this happened, and it seems like almost nobody I know has even seen this. You're one of the few people I know that had even seen this one.
Which was, again, I think a big coincidence where I was someone that at the time, like, frequently seeing what was new and available on Netflix, probably because of, like, my, like, general, like, taste, it was recommended to me. Otherwise, like, lack of marketing, there it's clear not a ton of people knew that this film came out.
No. Now, I think they definitely got screwed by the theaters via what I it sounds like really is just collusion.
Mhm.
The exhibitors refusing to show this, it sounds like it forced the studio into a Netflix only release. So you can't really emphasize that enough.
Mhm.
And as far as I can tell, this was going to be the first major simultaneous release ever if things had gone according to plan. Netflix has done limited theatrical releases ever since, but from what it sounds like, this was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be a bigger deal. It wasn't originally going to be just a Netflix film.
And I mean, even today, we can see a lot of reports and impact and how much streaming and releases like this are hurting films, or at least hurting the movie theater industry. So I can see why even this initial first big moment of this was a bit contentious.
For sure. They gave it lip service by giving it a very limited IMAX experiment release, but wasn't much of an effort. It
No,
says 10 to 15 IMAX screens in the United States. There's over 150 IMAX screens in the United States. So wasn't much.
yeah,
And I do
very
like
good.
that quote from the IMAX CEO about like this being a test and how the industry should really try to innovate because technology changes, viewers change. We have to figure out what does or doesn't work. Seems like a very level-headed approach on his part. But
And I was gonna say, even just coming to like modern day, Christopher Nolan, right? His big spat with Warner Brothers was over streaming release expectations for Oppenheimer.
right, he felt sort of betrayed by what they had done with Tenet.
And considering that this is just really those early days of where that contention really comes from.
Nevertheless, back to Sword of Destiny, there is no excuse for how poorly they marketed this film. It seems like Weinstein decided to cut his losses.
Mhm.
Again, just speculating. I mean, this is a marketing disaster. I had no idea this was coming. It sounds like nobody else did. You said it popped up on your Netflix things, but you were just as surprised as I was, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is a sequel to one of the most celebrated, most beloved, best films of all time. And the companies that produced it completely bungled the promotion of it.
Which is to say, like, I think there really is something there around cutting losses. If there really was no incentive to give it a grand release or put more money into marketing, then I can see how, like, Weinstein saw that the best route was just for a more quiet release. It just so happens it's like saying it's like one of the, like we've mentioned, we cannot emphasize enough how influential and how big Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the first film was, and to do it to its sequel is, I think, very offensive.
Offensive is the word. It's interesting too, because as you know, Anton, I bought the novelization to this film. They
Mhm.
went as far as commissioning a novelization, which is usually part of the promotion process, right?
Right.
They didn't do anything else. Also, I'm going to mention this several times throughout this episode, but big shout out to the novelization. It is quite good. It is quite different than the finished film, which we'll get into a little bit more. And a very special thanks to the author of the novelization, a gentleman named Justin Hill, who was kind enough to reply to my emails regarding this film.
Yeah.
So
Thank
thank you,
you.
Justin.
Thank you, Justin. Friend of the show, Justin Hill.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess we can maybe float the theory that Harvey Weinstein ruined this,
I think that's fair to say.
allegedly.
Uh, allegedly. But I mean, also at the same time, when we look at other aspects of the film in terms of the cuts and the production, it's not uncommon for Weinstein to make a lot of cuts to a film and then
Yeah,
probably look at what's the most. And he always, we've talked about this before, very focused on how do we make the most money out of these films. So it wouldn't shock me to go this route.
right. The lack of marketing or publicity usually means that a studio has no faith in the project and they are trying to cut their losses. So while we are reading the tea leaves a bit here, it is an educated guess on our part. I did email the Weinstein Company for some feedback. As of this recording, I have not gotten any response.
I
So
was gonna say, did you get a bounce back? Is that still a thing?
I didn't get a bounce back. As far as I know, the company is still in existence, or at least their email servers are. That's all I
Yeah.
can say.
It says so. I wanted to say this because we've seen a bit of a trend, especially for with HBO and its series, for DC TV series, in terms of a lot of studios to save money nowadays. They're just if they've already put a lot of work into the production, for example, the Batgirl TV series, they just end up canning it and then as a tax write off.
Oh.
So it's just interesting to me that they still, even at the time, felt, well, there's enough merit. Let's just do a quiet release. At least it didn't get that treatment of they've already shot so much and they're like, scrap it. But I could totally see it nowadays, especially in this market. Like it could have gone that route.
As far as the other big part of this, which is, why Ang Lee turned down the offer to direct this, I couldn't find much information on that either, other than he is known to dislike directing two films of the same genre.
Which doesn't surprise me.
No,
That's Ang Lee,
very selective in his material.
like the Hulk. Or sorry, Hulk.
I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about?
Oh right, he's never. You've
I've
never heard.
erased that from my memory.
Yeah.
Um, Next reason why this film wasn't better, it's in English. Unlike the previous film, which was in Mandarin, they made this one in English, which is kind of weird since the director, Yuan Wu Ping, is from Hong Kong. But
Yeah.
this was a co-production between Netflix, the Weinstein Company, and China Film Group. So it was pretty much an American film this time around. But again, Anton, baffling decision, because they couldn't have been using the excuse that if we don't make it in English, it won't make money, because the first film was a massive hit in the United States. The first film made $128 million here. And get this, I did not realize this until doing the research for this one. The first
Mhm.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is still, in 2024, the highest grossing foreign language film ever released in the United States.
Yeah, it's nuts because, well, it's amazing to me because it still stayed it has still, through the test of time, been so just amazing and monumental. But, like, even when I think of another foreign language film of, like, recent history, I thought, like, looking back and doing some research, like, for example, 2019, Parasite, big f foreign
Right.
language film, won Best Picture, not Best
Huge
Foreign
hit.
Film. It only made 50,000,000, or sorry, 53,000,000 in the United States.
And then
Yeah.
that 128, you adjust that for inflation, you're talking over
Like
200.
right, it's incredible.
This film needed to be in Mandarin. And look, but before we get into this a bit more, I do understand that the first film was not a massive hit in China. I understand that there was criticism about the actors not being native Mandarin speakers in China, and I do want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's enough that all 4 of the main actors, spoke different Chinese, like, different, how do I put this? Each actor spoke different versions of Chinese.
Dialects?
Dialects, maybe? Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
each actor spoke different dialects of Chinese. Chow spoke Cantonese, Yo speaks, Malaysian, Zhang Ji speaks, with a Beijing accent, so
right.
but at the same time, from what I've read, for, native speakers, it was a part of the experience was how dedicated these actors were to committing to the time period.
Well, this one not being in Mandarin, it has this air of inauthenticity to it, right? And that, again, that may
Yeah.
not be entirely fair, but this is really one of the last films that should be in English.
I mean, in general, like, for you, does it bother you when you have to watch a film with subtitles versus, like, being able to just consume it with English, in English language?
If I'm watching any kind of foreign film, right, in
Mhm.
a foreign language, I don't watch anything dubbed. I only watch it with subtitles. I want to hear the real actors' voices.
Mhm.
That's just how I feel about it. That extends to anime. I will watch subtitles for anime as often as I can.
Right.
I feel the same way here. I was surprised when I first started watching this when this came out, when it was in English. I was confused by it is what how
Yeah.
put off I was. I'm like, "Wait, the first one was in Mandarin. Why is this?" I was confused because I just assumed since Yuan Wu Ping directed it that it was a Chinese film, but it's not really a Chinese film.
Right. And I mean, even with the cast, there were American actors in the roles, so maybe they
Right.
didn't speak Chinese, so it would have been harder to actually get the cast to speak in Mandarin like the first film. But I agree with you. Like I don't I when if I'm watching a foreign language film or even like anime, I prefer to just go the subtitle route and really hear what the original actors had to say.
Right.
Versus this is a shift in Hollywood where when we think of like the peak of martial arts films from back in the day, everything was just dubbed, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think, especially for this film, watching the action play out, one of the strengths of the film is that the action choreography is very strong. And I feel like that when I see the actual scenes of the actors having discussions, it's in this ancient Chinese setting, but I can't help but think, well, they're speaking English to each other, so it's bringing me out of that mindset. I couldn't just watch freely, so it was a bit distracting.
It's an affront to the original film, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, in a vacuum, the language of a film does not make it good or bad.
Right. Absolutely.
But this film not being in Mandarin did not help its cause at all, to your point, especially with the setting. Moving on to the next reason why this wasn't better. This is going to be a lengthy reason, but the story.
Mhm.
Again, to mention the novelization written by Justin Hill, it is drastically different from the film in a lot of ways. It's unlike any other novelization that I have ever read. I'd estimate it's probably 30% of what you actually see in this finished film. If you are interested in perhaps reading a true sequel to the original film, I would highly recommend checking out the novelization.
Now, like, have you read the original, 5 novels that made the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon series?
No, and that's something I want to get into, though.
Yeah.
Have you?
I have not. I've always been tempted, but I know that, going into this film, we're getting snippets and pieces of that series even between the first film and this film.
Yes, that is absolutely something I want to talk about. On to this film itself, right? Starting off with just the storytelling, right? Hades die, pretty generic villain.
Mhm.
I want to take over the world. That's his motivation. We see that in a lot of these wuxia films, right?
Yes.
I like Jason Scott Lee. I think he brings a lot of physicality to this role, but there is not much depth to his character. But again, with the physicality, he does sell all the action stuff. He is a bona fide action actor.
Yeah, Jason Scott Lee, of course, has been in a lot of films that I remember from the '90s of just he was in Time Cop,
Yes.
Jungle Book, the
Who could
live action.
That's probably his most famous role, right? The
Well,
live action Jungle Book,
I'd argue his most famous role, at least for me, he played Bruce Lee in Dragon: The Bruce Lee Story.
which is a pretty cool movie.
Yeah.
Doesn't have much of a legacy, I feel like, anymore.
No, not,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately, but I thought that it was a great performance by him.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, he's really good in that. Well, Hades Dai, the character that he plays in this film. By the way, stupid name, Hades Dai.
Yeah,
Doesn't really sound Chinese at all to me.
but fits that same one-dimensional, character portrayal.
Yeah, it's not as cool as like Jade Fox. Like Jade Fox is
No.
just cool. Hades Dai, you're like, what? The Greek mythology? Who's it? James Woods? Hades Dai has a pretty good backstory in the novelization. He is a former monk who is expelled for practicing witchcraft, and he begins a reign of terror on his quest for conquering what they refer to in the film as the martial world, which really refers to the Qing Empire in China. So he's slowly killing off all the practitioners of the Iron Way. Now, the Iron Way, they mention this in the two films, but it is
Mhm.
basically the superpowered warriors who help protect the empire.
Yep.
They are practitioners of what is known as the Iron Way. And this explains so his reign of terror, right? He's trying to kill off basically the superheroes that are protecting the Empire. This explains the beginning of the film. Anton, you may have been confused, as was I, about why Michelle Yeoh's character, Shulien, right? Her wagon
Right.
is attacked by a bunch of bandits.
But we don't know why.
No, they don't explain this in the film at all. That is on Hades Die's orders. In the novelization, he targets her because he knows how important she is to the House of Tay, which is the royal family. And he wants her out of the way because that will allow him to much more easily get his hands on the Green Destiny sword. Unfortunately, it's not explained in the film at all.
No, and we don't really get explained in the film why he wants the Green Destiny for quite a bit.
We
So
no, we don't.
so just putting it out there for our listeners, all of this exposition that Pat has explained has already given way more depth and understanding to the film than what I had in the first 30 minutes of the film.
Yeah, it's a big flaw. I mentioned how different the novelization is, and I was so blown away by how different it was. This prompted me to email its author, Justin Hill. I also asked him for his general thoughts, like, well, why is the film so different? And is there anything you can tell me about, the making of the film, right? Because the production history we went over is pretty superficial. There's just not a lot of info about the making of this movie.
Mhm.
Mr. Hill was kind enough to give me some very thoughtful responses. Now, he pointed out some interesting things that I wanted to highlight. Anton, we mentioned the source material, right? The original novels.
Mhm.
He pointed out the first film's plot is probably a lot more confusing than people remember. What made it so forgivable was that the performances, the action, the cinematography, the music, the settings, they were all so outstanding that you didn't care about the plot. I kind of agree with him on that. And as much as I love that film, if you were to ask me what the plot is right now, I would probably struggle a little bit to tell you what it was.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Not taking anything away from the film, but I think it's an interesting point on his part. Also, and I did not realize this because, again, I haven't read the original novels. The first film took the title from the fourth novel of Wang Dulu's series, but it was not a straight adaptation of that novel itself. I did not realize this, but it took bits and pieces from all five novels. And he said one of the issues when it came to making this film is that by the time they got around to actually writing the sequel, there was not an obvious novel to source from. They had already used bits and pieces from the, all five novels. So
Mhm.
they were kind of faced with a choice. Do we do the same thing and take pieces from each one, or do we try to do an adaptation of just the one novel? And it seemed like they tried to do both.
Which explains the 7 years of rewrites?
Yeah, and 10 different screenplays.
Yeah.
Now, the actual guy that wrote the screenplay, John Fusco, he said in a quote for The Guardian, "This introduces a new generation of star-crossed lovers in a new series of antagonists in a battle of good and evil. It's so vast and rich, and I found the characters from the second and third books in the series to create a most interesting stew while being as true to the source material as I could be." End quote.
Which which I could totally see, especially with who they included in the cast,
Yeah,
right? With,
yeah, yeah.
Snowface and Wei Fang.
Yeah, it's very, very similar to, Gen Yu and Dark Cloud from the original, I'll say that.
Absolutely.
Anton, you mentioned how confusing the opening 30 minutes is. I was taking some notes as on the last rewatch. This is everything that happens in the first 5 minutes of the film. So we get Shu Lien's voiceover explaining the
Mhm.
time gap between the first film and this, right? Mourning the loss of her unrequited love, Li Mu Bai, played
Mhm.
by Chow Yun Fat. Then her carriage gets attacked with little in the way of context. We don't know where she's going or who's attacking her. She gets aided by a mysterious masked warrior, and then it completely cuts away. And then Wei Fang is introduced. Wei Fang is the young man played by Harry Shrum Jr. And then we get Snowvase. We don't know who she is at this point. She's trying to kill Hades Dai, who we also don't know who is at
Nope.
this point, at his compound. But then he lets her go after she fails. This all happens in 5 minutes. There's just way too much going on, not enough time, not enough context. It's just not great storytelling. You just don't know enough about the characters or who they are, who's interacting with who is this person trying to kill these people, what's going on. You just don't know.
Yeah, and I'd argue there's still a bit of trying to do show not tell. But it just there was even then when I think of show not tell used properly in a film, It's using the context of the scenes to be able to tell the story or move the plot forward. Just throwing a bunch of things at the screen and just hoping it catches on or people think about the film later on and be like, "Oh, now that makes sense." I don't think that's great storytelling.
Everything feels chopped up. It really feels like someone, maybe it was Weinstein, maybe it was someone else, they came in and chopped this up.
Yep, no,
Everything
agreed.
in the story is half-baked to me. Every character, every scene, every set piece, every arc. It just feels like it needed more. Often on this podcast, we talk about films being too slowly paced. I think this has the opposite problem.
Mhm.
This needed to be longer. I
Oh,
needed
yeah.
more from the story.
Especially when you think of what it's able to tell in the film's length, it's not like the original was, like, super, super long either,
No,
right?
I think it was like 2
It was
hours,
like 2 it
10
was like
minutes.
yeah, it was like 2 hours, but
Yeah.
at the same time, still able to invest in the right components of, like, certain individual characters' storylines and how they interact together. This one felt like there wasn't enough investment in that.
No, it's the Cliff's Notes thing. It felt like there were chunks missing. Like for example,
Mhm,
take the scene where the a silent wolf he hires a bunch of warriors. Right, they
mhm,
go to Certe's compound. They're all drinking together. It just comes out of nowhere, and then Snowvase she joins them. Right,
right.
and then she has a bunch of flashbacks that are equally awkward and confusing, and I just found myself wanting more from everything and not getting it.
And there's also a lot of assumptions there, or presumably, the viewers would remember the Tay character from the first film. There's a lot of callbacks to the previous film that, again, just needs extra context if someone's already seen the film or already seen the previous film to properly, grasp the weight of certain scenes. So, yeah, it felt very jumbled.
Here's the worst part for you. Snowvase is supposed to be Yu and Dark Cloud's daughter, but they
Mhm,
changed this in the film. Both of her
mhm.
parents were killed by Hades' die in the novelization. Again, I can't figure out why they did this. It doesn't make any sense. Yu is a supporting character in the novelization, which means she was in the screenplay at one point. But not only does she make no appearance here at all, her character is changed to the name of Han Mei. It's just some random warrior that gets killed by Hades' die. If you think about Yu's backstory with Shu Lien,
Yep.
I don't know why they would take out all the emotional punch of that in here and just change her. Oh, I'm the daughter of Han Mei. Who's that? You don't even know who it is. It's some random person.
And again, it's just nuts to think like something that almost seems like a low-hanging fruit of like, yes, use their emotional connection from the first film to really fuel the relationship of this new character and Michelle Yeoh's character in the second film. But they don't.
It's idiotic. You're right. It is low hanging fruit. Like it's just so obvious that she would be Yu's daughter. But
But hey, what do we know?
what do we know? And then we get to Wei Fang, right?
Mhm.
He has a huge backstory in the novelization. It explains why he joins Hades Die's clan, why he wants to become a warrior. Not really gone into detail here.
Nope, very more one-dimensional, but I actually really liked Harry Shum Jr. in this.
I did too. I did like his performance. Who knew? The guy from Glee. Anton, can you please explain to me Blind Witch Lady?
It was 2016. It was a different time.
Right.
There were blind witch ladies and everything. Left and right films in 2016 had it include a blind witch lady. But in this film, it weighed a bit too heavily in the mysticism with this particular character, and also just felt a bit of out of nowhere.
What were her motivations?
Couldn't tell you.
Why was she helping Hades die?
I don't know.
Was her character necessary?
I'll give you a big no.
Um, it felt like she wandered on to the set from another movie. Here's the wild part. You thought it went into the mysticism?
Mhm.
I'm probably repeating myself ad nauseum here. She does have a backstory in the novelization. She is some kind of demon in the novelization who has like 6 arms.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the one part of the novelization I was like pretty confused by because they don't really explain why she has 6 arms or why she's like a shape shifting demon.
Yeah, they don't really have anything like that in the first film either.
They don't. Her character should have just been omitted here because she literally randomly pops up in the woods in this film.
Yeah, and in terms of serving the purpose of moving the plot forward, not really necessary, right?
No, No, she also gets killed really fast.
What was the witch lady's name again even? I'm trying to remember.
I think she's just known as Blind Enchantress.
Yeah, okay. Well, it wasn't my favorite performance in the film, and also
Yeah, no, she doesn't have
yeah,
a name.
yeah, and so okay, that's hilarious. But just being able to, yeah, think of when we have a new character introduced, especially a character like that, very Shakespearean in general, right? Like witches or those being able to be prophetic, leading the warrior towards moving some sort of direction in the plot, whether for nefarious reasons. Not really necessary in this film.
No, like I said, everything feels half-baked, right? The climactic battle scene, it comes out of nowhere. They all just decide to storm Hades' Die's fortress,
Mhm.
and all of the bad guys get killed pretty quickly. It just feels like an incomplete story to me. It's pointless to even discuss the plot in any more detail, right? Like
Um,
there's some flashbacks, but they're pretty hollow, right? You have martial arts masters who are training some people. You have a bad guy who's bad, but without any real motivation. He's trying to steal a special sword, but to your point, it's not really pointed out why, other than Blind Witch Lady tells him, "You need to get this sword."
and
There's no drama.
No, and to be when I thought about it more, when there was dialogue, scenes felt like they were sticky glued together just to get to the next action scene. And don't get me wrong, again, like I said, one of the strengths of the film was the action choreography and the action scenes.
Definitely.
Very very reminiscent of the first film with the flying and like almost dancing style of fighting, and also just incredible choreography. But in terms of the actual story development, it's so hard to even look at this film and say that it was close to the first one, because it
Not even
wasn't
in the
because
same
it wasn't
ballpark.
because it
No.
wasn't even.
I'm going to
uh,
sum up the story with a quote that made me chuckle. This is from John Liu of the Straits Times. Quote, Sword of Destiny is indeed a movie version of General Chow's chicken, a Chinese dish made for the American market. Thankfully, like the dish, it's not offensively bad. It is a kid's meal. End quote.
That's really well put. It's digestible, but I would argue offensively so.
Well, that brings us to the next reason, right? How does it stack up as a martial arts film? This is more of a question
Mm,
than a reason, but let's
mhm.
get into this. We mentioned how chopped up the story feels. Just really quick, I could not verify this officially. I did read online that there is a Chinese version that runs a little bit longer, but I can't confirm that.
And I wonder if those scenes would be more context for the story, which it desperately needed, or if it's just a lot of action that was cut.
You would hope it's story stuff. Although the official runtime is listed at 101 minutes, so I don't. Again, this is all unconfirmed. Who
Yep,
knows?
that's fair.
Wuxia films, they're known for their visual artistry. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think this film is a complete failure. Although the story was incomplete, you mentioned the fight choreography several times. It is excellent. It is what you would expect from Yen Wu Ping. I found all of the fights very entertaining. There's some serious talent on display here. Now, again, I don't want to keep comparing this to the first film, but we don't really have a choice. The fights are not nearly as good as the first film. That's what happens when your director is named Ang Lee, who very much involved himself in the action choreography in the first film. It's
Mhm,
worth pointing out. The cinematography was better, but this film, I mean, the fights are good. The tavern brawl is really entertaining. That fight on the frozen
mhm,
lake,
mhm.
I thought was pretty cool. When Silent Wolf, Donnie Yen's character, when he actually fights Hades Die on top of the pagoda tower. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, on the pagoda tower. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, on top of when Silent Wolf,
Right.
Donnie Yen's character fights Hades Die on the tower, it's fun to watch.
I totally agree, but I feel like what takes away from the impact of those scenes is also just the stakes of the first film.
Yeah, this isn't as good. Now, to be fair, the cinematography in the first film is some of the best cinematography ever put to film.
Mhm,
Newton Thomas Siegel, who shot this film, he's a very experienced director of photography. I think he did a commendable job here, although it's a very different look from Peter Pal's work on the first film. This is unfortunately much more digital looking,
it seemed more like a Netflix, like what I would expect a Netflix release film to look like,
which is unfortunate.
which is unfortunate. Yeah.
There are some good locations, right? Some scenes look quite lovely. There are some natural environments that I think are filmed very well. There's forests, there's mountains. We get some snowy stuff.
But personally, having not seen enough of the behind the scenes to know what was a soundstage and what wasn't, I feel like there were a lot of scenes where I thought to myself, "That looks like a soundstage," which is not
I
good.
think no, I think the frozen river fight is the best one in the film.
Mhm.
But something I noticed, this is actually
Okay.
kind of funny. None of the scenes before or after take place in winter.
Oh,
So I don't really know how the river was frozen unless it was like a magic river.
we're we're gonna have to chalk it up to Magic River. Very good
Magic.
catch.
And all of the backgrounds look artificial.
Yeah,
There's
but I
just a
mean,
lot of CGI, a
yeah.
lot of color correcting. There's at least 3 different scenes where they go from exterior to interior, and the lighting I found to be jarring. I don't know if you caught this, but some of the interior scenes were lit with, like, this, like, Halloween orange glow, and, like, they were, like, very
Yeah.
clearly trying to mimic sunlight. It just looked completely unnatural.
Which again, like, it looked more like I forget the name of the series that was on Netflix at the time, but it really did feel like more of a Netflix TV series and not in a good way because of things like that. Because it's like, oh, there's a lot of CGI here that just does not look like it's being used effectively. A lot of that color correcting that you're talking about, yeah, that's the hues looked a little too blown out, or just it felt like the overall just even tone, like the color tones of the film just looked uneven as well.
Like, if Zack Snyder directed this and was trying to turn it into 300, it's just
Not
oversaturated.
but not yeah, not quite as dark as a Zack Snyder film in terms of like the color
Right,
tones, but
right.
totally agree with you there. Very highly saturated.
The Green Destiny sword, it's noticeably different than the first film too. You can tell it's
Mhm.
not the same prop. Now I think that's a little nitpicky, but it's just something I noticed when I watch these back to back. Like, that's not the same prop.
Mm,
Sidebar question for you, Anton.
okay.
Is the Green Destiny sword the coolest movie sword ever?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a lot of swords that go up against it. So it's hard unless we like pit them up against each other. I
I've got
mean,
some
yep.
candidates for you.
Okay.
So either Sting or Anduril from Lord of the Rings,
Yep.
the
Those are
Atlantean sword from Conan,
yep, pretty epic sword.
the one from Highlander, pretty cool sword.
So, which sword? Because remember, he had the katana given to him by Sean Connery's character, or he had his more traditional Celtic sword.
Trick question, it could be either.
Could be either. They're very fair. The really cool thing about that katana, though, it had like the dragon on the hilt.
That's a pretty cool. Oh, that's a good one. Braveheart has a really cool sword, very similar to
Yep.
the Claymore from Highlander.
Yep. Very similar.
Um, the Hitari Hanzo sword from Kill Bill.
Yes. Pretty excellent sword and quite a name drop for any sword.
Yeah, there's probably more. That's what I came up with just on a little cursory Google research. I think Green Destiny is my favorite.
In terms of the importance of the sword itself to the story, very monumental and very important sword, and very powerful sword. So, I agree. It's a pretty it's a pretty great all-time sword in film. But
It
does
is
it beat
managed to be used well here.
but does it beat He-Man's sword?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
You know another mistake this film makes. So the big red accented sword that Hades' die uses,
Mhm.
that has a name in the novelization. It's called the Hellfire sword. It's like a
Oh,
badass
that's
name,
so cool.
right? And of course, it's just not in the film. Why include that? Why include something cool? Well, can't put that in the film. And that's just another.
Yeah.
It's just a missed opportunity, just like this film.
Yeah. So I had a question for you. Um, I know that we've shared both our admiration for the original Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. In general, like, do you enjoy martial arts films?
I do. I haven't seen a ton of them. I like I like the very famous ones,
Mhm.
especially the ones that followed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is another reason why I love that movie so much. It opened the doors for other ones like House of Flying Daggers, Hero.
Hero. Yep.
Yeah, I do. I do. I just haven't seen a ton of them.
Yeah.
And I have admittedly tried to watch some old, like, wuxia stuff, and I can't get into all of it. Some of them are frankly just just really cheaply made, and it doesn't. I feel like a lot of them don't hold up well, and I understand they didn't have big budgets, and I try not to hold that against a film, but some of them it's
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah, so part of why I bring it up is also just because it shows the importance of the evolution of martial arts films over time and how monumental even a film like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is for martial arts in general to be taken seriously as a film genre. Because historically, there have been amazing martial arts films that I'm a big fan of, right? Enter the Dragon comes to mind as one of, great all-time films.
Of course.
Once Upon a Time in the West. Once Upon a Time in China. There's the classic House of Flying, uh, Iron Monkey, and you already mentioned House of Flying Dagger.
Yeah.
So a
Oh,
lot of
sorry. I
yeah,
should say I like all the old school Jackie Chan stuff very much. All the
right.
police story stuff. I love all that stuff.
Drunken Master, amazing films.
Yeah.
But I think a common criticism is just those films can't really transcend what makes a great movie in terms of tying together the acting, the story, the cinematography. But the martial arts itself and the choreography is what you kind of people would typically say, well, that's what you go to a film like that to see. You see some great action. But then once you have a film like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that's really able to just throw those criticisms out the window. And
That's
then
just it.
and it's incredible to be able to do that. So when we have this film, Sword of Destiny, this to me is actually probably more in what people historically have considered martial arts films, just like popcorn movie. Lots of action, plot doesn't really make sense, but hey, there's a lot of fighting and a lot of really cool swords.
And that's why I don't think this film is a failure. I think in terms of the martial arts parts of it, it delivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the score, Shigeru Umabayashi composed the music.
Mhm.
I liked it.
Yeah, it was good. Not the best, but
No, it's
it's
not
pretty
Tan
good.
Dun's work on the first film,
No.
which is, by the way, won an Oscar. And then here's the other part of why I don't think this film is a failure. I think the performances were pretty good. Michelle Yeoh, terrific.
Yeah,
She holds the movie together. Her and Donnie Yen hold this together.
completely. And I mean, Michelle Yeoh, our listeners should know, she's won an Academy Award, a legend in Hong Kong cinema,
And James Bond,
and James Bond, and did a fantastic job in this film. And of course, Donnie Yen cannot complain about him either in terms of his impact to not only martial arts films, but film in general. But of course, most recently, you can't help but think of the revival of like of martial arts cinema than his Ip Man films.
for sure. I should have mentioned those. I like those ones too. I think is there four of them?
Well, with him in it, I think there's 4, but there was so popular, there was a lot of different actors took on the Ip Man, title and
Okay.
made their own Ip Man films.
Okay. So I've seen the ones with him in it, which I
Right,
like very much.
right.
Yeah, he's the king of this type of film.
Oh, and you could see it with not only is his choreography great, facial expressions, being able to sell scenes with just the look of an eye or a smirk, great actor.
Silent Wolf is a badass name. They give him a badass outfit in this film with like the wide brimmed hat.
Mhm.
You're right about the expressions on his face because not only can he deliver on all of the martial arts physicality, but to your point, he is so much of an entertainer. Like you can tell during that tavern brawl when he's stepping on all of the brawlers' ankles and he's
Mhm.
almost making it look like a dance. And you can tell just by his facial expression how much he is enjoying himself.
Right, he's having fun.
Yeah.
And also just how above the competition he is.
100%. And again, when he fights Hades Die at the end, even though there's some goofy CGI in a couple of shots, that is ultimately what you're paying to see, right?
Mhm.
Those types of scenes. You're like, oh, cool. I get to see the Green Destiny go against this unnamed red sword. But really quick, back to the first film. You were touching on this earlier. The reason why the first film is held in such high regard is that it delivered on all that action, but the action was almost a bonus compared to the love story, or
Right,
I should say the two love stories, right?
right.
You had a rare elevation of the material. And unfortunately, you don't get that in this sequel, even though there is a love story in this film.
And I can see where they were trying to mimic that, but There was not enough investment in the motivations of the individual characters or even the passions of the individual characters to find it compelling to focus on those relationships.
No, like the two lovers in this film, right, who end up being Snow Vase and Harry Shum Jr.'s
Right.
character, Wei Fang. Wei Fang.
Mr. Glee.
Right. They don't get a lot of time to develop what ends up being their romance, right? Now, compare that to the first film, Gen Yu and Dark Cloud. There's like that 30-minute chunk of the film where it's a flashback and it's only
Mhm.
their two characters.
And it was, again, because of, like you said, because of that focus, that any scenes that either put them in harm's way or you saw characters battle together, you knew how much impact that had on the romance or the relationships, and the stakes were high.
Very much so. But these two actors, right? Natasha Liu Bordizzo, I think she's fine. I did like
Yeah.
Harry Shum Jr., just like you. Very charismatic. I enjoyed his performance.
Yeah, very charismatic. Funny enough, he has a dance background, so I think that translated really well to fight choreography.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, the character development is pretty shallow. I did like all of the performances, though. I
Yeah.
don't think there was a real weak link in the film. And that is a point in this film's favor.
Yeah, even Jason Scott Lee, even if he didn't have a lot to work with in terms of the story being told of his motivations, he sold Hades' Die really well.
Yeah, definitely. He is a physical match for any of the characters. You can believe that Donnie Yen's character might not be able to beat him.
Yeah, might not, but we won't reveal what happens.
We won't reveal what happens. You have to watch this film. I have a feeling out of all the films we covered, this might have the lowest viewership in terms of who has actually seen this film because it's us two and like five other people.
We're probably doing the film more marketing than their actual marketing team did by covering
Uh,
this film.
and the sad part is, Anton, you're not joking.
Right.
Yeah,
So you're welcome.
yeah, you're welcome. We will warn you though, this film does not have the romanticism of the first one.
No.
It's just kind of like a regular wuxia film, right? Like that's how I view it.
Yeah, it's a run of the mill martial arts film
Yeah.
with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon attached to its title.
I don't have anything else in terms of the reasons. We talked about the poor marketing. We talked about the fact that it's in English as opposed to Mandarin. We talked about the very confusing storytelling at times and how chopped up it was and it should have been longer. And we talked about it, just our thoughts as it's stacking up as a martial arts film. Anton, it is time to tell the listeners whether or not we like this film and give our ratings.
Oh man, fun part of the always one of my favorite parts of our episodes. Would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. Based on the total lack of marketing and how poorly the Weinstein Company bungled the release of this film, it had almost no chance of succeeding. The theaters didn't want to show it. They doomed it from the start. They made a mistake by filming it in English as opposed to Mandarin. Almost nobody realized this film exists. Creatively, the odds were stacked against it too. The story is pretty confusing at parts. It feels like there's just giant chunks missing. It really needed to be longer. Making a pseudo sequel to one of the most beloved films of all time is always going to be a challenge. We'll see what happens with Gladiator 2. I think this film is passable. It's okay. It has its moments. It has really great fights in it, which is ultimately what you want out of a martial arts movie. I call it watchable fluff. It cannot hold a candle to the first film. But as far as something to watch on a Friday night with a cocktail in hand, I think you could do a lot worse. It is certainly not deserving of its disaster level 20% Rotten Tomatoes score. This film is not a disaster. I think it's derivative, it's predictable, but it does tell a passable story. I enjoyed the performances. I love Michelle Yeoh. I love Donnie Yen. The action sequences held my attention. I just think it's a flawed attempt to Americanize a Chinese art house classic. Netflix did a passable job with it, but calling it a sequel to the original was a mistake. And I think if it were not tied to the original, it would probably have been better regarded. This will always go down for me as one of the biggest what if movies of all time. It's a huge missed opportunity, one of the biggest missed opportunities that I can think of. It should have been a bigger deal than it was, and it's a shame because, as we know from the novelization, the elements for a better story were there, and the people that made this film chose to ignore them. The best I could possibly rate this is a C minus.
Very fair, Pat. So, when I think of my love for martial arts films, as my tastes have changed over time, I've also appreciated in any genre when a film is able to transcend expectations for predecessors. So, it's so great to be able to see in historically how influential the first Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is to martial arts films. When I think of this particular film, as Pat mentioned, the odds were not in favor of this film succeeding. And when we look at the production history, the multiple screen rewrites, the probably lots of cuts to the film and being able to be more understandable, and just creative decisions that seemed a bit baffling, like making the whole film in English, it is difficult and disappointing because of how great the original film was. But having said this, when I even when I think of martial arts films that I've really enjoyed, it's so hard to put them in it's so hard to put them in a great category because it this film just shares a lot of the same flaws of those films or any film that are a bit more run of the mill. Low like it's the story is just not there. The plot is not quite does not quite make as much sense as one would hope. But with a martial arts film, what I want to see is strong martial arts, and we do get that. Now, it's interesting to note that Yen Wu Ping did direct another Hong Kong like martial arts film back in 1993, Iron Monkey, and that starred Donnie Yen as the lead. So my recommendation, listeners, if you want to see really why probably Ang Lee brought him on to be the action choreographer, go watch Iron Monkey, because not only does it have the same element of strong choreography, but also stronger plot development, understanding of how to properly how to put relationships on the forefront and how that influences the action and the weight of the scenes. Or you could even just watch the original Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. If anything, if you take away Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in this film's title, take away those expectations, you have yourself a pretty solid martial arts film. But because it has that in the title, a lot of expectations come with it, and the film suffers for it. It's a shame that the film didn't get its due respect and proper marketing and investment from the studio to really shine, but is what it is, and it will be put down in history as the sequel to one of the greatest films of all time. And unfortunately, like sequel track records, it did not do great. For me, this film sits at a C minus.
Wow, I thought you were going to rate it lower than me.
No, because like I said, it's a martial arts film that does its job for run of the mill martial arts films.
It does. Are we being kind to this film? Because it's like, the more I think about it, as you were just giving your monologue, this is a pretty terrible sequel.
It's terrible, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like, so have you ever seen Fists of Fury?
Yes.
Objectively, that shouldn't be a good movie, right? Like, the plot makes 0 sense. Um,
Yeah, you're right.
like, the character development also makes no sense. None of the motivation makes sense. The ending makes 0 sense. But at the same time, what holds it together but like amazing action and then continuous themes that really tug on the heartstrings of its viewers. So I don't know. I feel like this actually was pretty on par with like an average. It's on par, but a bit lower than your average martial arts film.
That's fair. Yeah. All right.
But still, not to say it was good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess C minus isn't great. I don't know, the 20% Rotten Tomato score, I'm like, this movie's better than that.
Yeah, I would totally argue that because there hasn't been many people that have seen it, that the weight of that score isn't maybe statistically significant as we'd like it to be.
I think it has 35 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which is
Right, like that's
not a lot.
yeah.
Most films of you would expect most films of this profile to have like at least 100 reviews.
I would challenge our listeners to go watch and have their own thoughts of where it should land.
Yep. If you have Netflix, you don't have to pay money to watch this film because it's on there forever.
So go check it out.
Well, Anton, that's it for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny. I hope we at least answered some of the questions that we asked in the prologue. I think we
I
did.
I think we did.
Yeah.
And it's fun to fly through the skies of this fantastical world, but I think I'm ready for us to focus on the future to the next film.
Ooh, and it's a good one. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock is next
And
week's episode.
oh, a lot more searching apparently. That'll be good.
But searching for a very tangible thing. A
Yes.
film that tells you exactly what it is in the title and it delivers on it.
And that'll be more on next week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better?
See you then.